Today I'm checking out the OH300 in-ear monitors from Ikko Audio. I'm going to show you what's in the box. I'm going to do a little review, compare it to some others in that price range, and give you my thoughts on the sound and who is this monitor for. So let's get into the unboxing and we'll talk about the sound on the other side of that. Let's take a look at what comes in the box. And right off the bat, we can see it promises high-res audio. I don't think that's an actual technical specification, but we'll roll with it. These are dynamic in-ear monitors, CNC and photochromic glass. I can barely read this text from here. They have a 10mm composite liquid crystal diaphragm unit, sensitivity of 107 decibels, and impedance of 32 ohms, which is going to be good for smartphones and other smaller devices without a lot of amplification. This frequency plot is too small to even focus on my lens, but we have 2K here rising up. Looks like at 3K, there's kind of a bump and a dip, another peak around 4K. There's a dip here around 6K, and then we sort of roll off after that with a little sort of boost around 8K, depending on how accurate this chart is. Looks like we've got some documentation here, a user guide. Nice presentation here of all the different ear tip sizes. And we have the driver here. Kind of cool. You can see some of the exposed traces. I'm not sure if that's actually part of the PCB or decorative, but I like the electronics look to that. It's got a nice shape to it, lots of contours. Solid enough plastic body. Got a dynamic driver in there by the looks of it. Overall, looks like a pretty promising headphone. This comes with a total of 6 sets of ear tips, and it looks like there's 2 different styles, one with a narrower inner bore and one with a wider one. I'm not sure how that will affect the sound exactly. Maybe it's for fit, but there's small, medium, and large for both of these styles. So a total of 6. So whatever style you prefer, maybe one is better for bass or clarity. Who knows? I'll listen to them and test them out. We've got another box here, probably the headphone cable. It's a fairly large, robust cable. Feels nice. It's got a kind of rubbery feel to it, but nice and thick. I like that. So that's everything that comes in the box. It would have been nice to include some memory foam ear tips. I have plenty, so I will test those out and see if it sounds better with the stock ear tips or the memory foam. But either way, that's a nice inclusion. If you're going to use these as in-ear monitors, that's essential. So that is something extra you'd have to buy if you don't already have a whole bunch, which I do. So I'll test those out and I'll let you know how they sound. Now, I was a little critical that these didn't come with memory foam ear tips. And I think if you're going to use these live, that's pretty important for protecting your hearing. However, these don't sound as good with the memory foam tips as they do with the stock tips. So I've learned a lot in this process about the importance of ear tips. I've tried out the ones that were included with this, as well as a whole bunch of others that I have. Memory foam, some different shapes and sizes, different materials. I guess they're all silicone, but maybe they all have slightly different builds and different diameters of the bore length, the bore width. So there is a lot that goes into ear tip selection, and I actually like the ones that come with these quite a bit. So while they may not help you as much for hearing protection, they do provide really good bass, and I thought they sounded better than memory foam tips. So I can kind of understand why they didn't include those, even though it would have been nice to see for people who want to use these live. But I'm not sure if that's the intended audience for these. I see a lot of these hi-fi in-ear monitors, and I always associate in-ear monitors with live musicians who want to be able to hear themselves while they're performing. But it seems like there's a market for people who just want in-ear monitor style earbuds for listening to music, and I think that's where these really shine. On the topic of ear tips, there are 2 included styles as well as 3 sizes of each. There is a narrow bore and a wide bore, and the wide bore is going to give you more presence in the treble region, and the narrower bore is going to give you better bass. At least that's what I've found with these, and that seems to be confirmed by other people online, though I suppose it depends somewhat on the monitors. Now, in my review of the KZ DeFis, I noted that they were very bright and they sounded much better with the memory foam tips than the included stock tips. Well, the stock tips with that, even though there was 2 colors, were all the wide bore style. And I tried out these narrow bores, and those sounded much better on it. Now, those are still brighter monitors than the OH300. However, the bass response was better with these narrow bore tips on the DeFis as well as these. So if you want more bass, find a narrower and perhaps a longer bore ear tip. And if you want more treble, you want a more open, a wider bore. I feel like I've said bore a lot. I'm talking about the little hole that the sound comes out of, just to be clear. I also thought memory foam tips would always increase the bass over silicone. That doesn't seem to be the case because these narrow bore tips have better bass than the memory foam. It's not a huge difference, but I definitely like the sound better with the silicone, and the bass does seem to be more powerful. So either way, these monitors have good bass response, but if you go with the wide bore silicone tips, it's definitely perhaps lets out more treble, and so you get less apparent bass. I don't know that it decreases the bass or just increases the treble. Doesn't really matter. I think are a bit too bright with the wide bore tips on this, and the narrow ones have quite a good bass. I also experimented with the medium and the large sizes to see which had better bass response. While the large ones, I think, have perhaps a better seal and so a little more bass, I thought it started to cloud things up a bit and I didn't like it as much. So I found the narrow medium size worked well for me. Of course, it depends on your ears, but the small were definitely too small, and the large were maybe not unusably large, but they're just a little bit tight, and I also thought that that extra bass was kind of too much for these, because these already have good bass response. So let's talk about how they sound, because I've waffled on about ear tips for long enough. In general, I would say these are balanced, but they're not really flat. They're not truly neutral. They're sort of balanced in the way that most people probably enjoy listening to music, which is slightly hyped. It's got extra top end, extra low end, kind of a scoop out in the middle. In the case of these, I think it's somewhere in the region of like 500 to 2K. What does the box say? If the chart on the back of the box is accurate, it's got kind of a mid scoop centered around about 800 or 1K, kind of between 100 hertz and ending at 2K, where you start to see some treble boost. Now, I didn't think the treble on these was overly bright, and given this frequency plot, I actually expected the treble to be kind of more apparent. And it's not dark by any means, but it's not overly bright. So last time I was reviewing some in-ear monitors, I was looking at these KZ DeFis. I did like these, but they're quite bright. For someone who just wants to listen to music, I wouldn't say these are a top choice. They are very detailed, but they're very bright. And I think these would be good in a live context where you probably have a lot of bass, a lot of low-end energy around you, and you want that extra top end to cut through so you can hear what you're monitoring. That's a practical scenario. For music, I think the OH300s are far more pleasant. They're a lot more normal, I would say. They're clear, they're detailed. I also compared them, of course, to my trusty AKG Samsung stock headphones, just because probably people are familiar with these, and I'm not an Apple guy, so I don't have any AirPods, but these are about $13 on Amazon. I looked. They come free with a lot of Samsung phones, or at least they used to. These are actually quite good, I think, for the price, considering you can buy replacement pair for about $13. These were not so much worse than the OH300s. They were, as you could expect, not as good as the OH300s, which cost more. The OH300s are $50 currently on Amazon. These were $13. I think they hold up really well for $13, but the OH300s have more clarity in the top end as well as better bass. They're not a world apart in terms of the overall tuning. I think they're both going for a similar kind of feel, which is, a gentle mid scoop to kind of let the bass and the treble shine. But in neither case did I think they were overly scooped in the mids. I like mids. I think they're good. And as a metal musician and listener, it's kind of important. That's where a lot of the guitars are. It's where a lot of vocals are. So while it may sound good to kind of cut some of those mids out and make things sound a little more clear, a little bigger, if you go too far, you start to lose guitars. Certainly if you're listening to metal or rock or any guitar genre, that's not so good. I thought these sound quite good with metal. They don't sound overly flat or overly hyped. But they are not flat, obviously. They're not reference headphones. They're not as flat as these Audio-Technica M50s. Those are more reference style. They're still a little bit hyped too. Some people say the M50s are too hyped, but they're definitely flatter than these OH300s. These are very light, but the build quality seems good. They're semi-transparent, so you can see the internals and you can see all the seams. Everything looks very clean. There's no traces of glue or messy wires shoved around. I compared these to the KZ ZSN Pros, which have a similar kind of design with this smoky plastic shell that's transparent. But the ZSNs look to have epoxy or something, some kind of glue all in there, which may help keep everything in place, maybe a durability thing. But these definitely look cleaner and neater than those. Of course, they're also about twice the price, so, hopefully the build is better. I can't really speak for their durability because I haven't used them extensively, but the cable feels solid. The ear hooks feel solid. They're nice and flexible, but not overly flexible. They retain their shape well. And I have no real complaints. I don't see any issues with the build at all. They look solid to me. I've used them for a number of hours now. I've had no problem. The cable is good. I never get any clipping or having one side go out from the cable not fitting well. It fits my phone well. My phone amplifies these no problem. They're, I think, 34 ohm resistance, which is on the low side. Not quite as low as those KZs, which are a little louder because of that low impedance. But 32 is still fine for being driven off a phone or a laptop, something that doesn't have an external amp. These get more than loud enough for my phone. I can't turn my phone up all the way before it's unpleasant, but I do turn it up a little bit more with these than some other headphones, so they're slightly higher impedance. They might benefit from a headphone amp, but these are pretty low impedance, and so I don't know that you'd notice a real difference with a headphone amp unless it really improved the quality, which probably the DAC in your phone is just fine, I would say. But hey, some people would disagree. So the weight of these is 10 grams without the ear tips, without the cable, just the earbuds themselves. 10 grams, which is quite light, 5 grams each. The KZ ZSN Pros were 12.5 grams for the pair without ear tips, and the D-Fis were 25. So less than half the weight of the D-Fis and less than the ZSN Pros. Now, both of those, ZSNs have a metal faceplate, and the D-Fis are all metal. These are all plastic and polycarbonate glass, I think it is. And so they're quite light, but again, I wouldn't be worried about durability. Maybe don't step on them. Don't drop them under a car. But other than that, they should be just fine. So who are these for? I think they're for more of a general audience, music listeners, as well as musicians who like the IEM style. You could use them live, no problem, but I think they're also kind of for the consumer who wants a more hi-fi headphone, likes the IEM style, the look, but wants something that's going to be tuned more or less like they're used to, like a more normal headphone with good clarity and good detail, but not going to be like super bright, which can be useful for live use, but less useful for just listening to music. If you're using them a lot all day, the fact that they're really lightweight is nice, and any kind of IEM style that has the ear clip, it's going to be great if you're walking around or working with them, wearing them for long periods of time and don't want to worry about them falling out. So I think the in-ear monitor style design is more than just for the musician and the live artist. It's not bad for the general public, and I think these are really good for that. They're I would say normal sounding in a good way. They're good sounding, but not way to one extreme or the other. But they do have quite nice bass, I'll say, and compared to most things, even these M50s, the over-ear headphones are not necessarily going to have a bigger bass. They can. These aren't overly exaggerated. OH300 aren't overly exaggerated, but the bass is pretty powerful. And depending on the ear tips you choose and the right fit, the right seal in your ear, you can get some pretty big bass out of this without it getting super muddy and out of control. So that's a whole lot of thoughts on these. If you want to go check them out, I'll put a link below. And thanks to Ikko for sending these over to me to check out. And I'll see you in the next video.